Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where we continue the mission of highlighting veterans and service organizations who continue to serve our community and our nation. We're brought to you by Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Don't worry, retire happy. Welcome aboard. Hey, what a great day. I am surrounded by Marines. I'm Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy veteran, Vietnam era. I was on aircraft carriers over there. And Chuck Wright, you were a great helicopter pilot.
Yes, and you've used great twice now, so great is out of the vocabulary. Write that down.
Okay, all right, okay, all right.
We're rather irreverent here, and for those of us who can see us, we're coming to you from the ready room of the USS Midway. I'm proud to say that I've actually bounced on that ship, and it is now a floating museum in San Diego, and it is a must-see when you're out on the as we call it, the left coast.
It is. Now, we got a couple of things for the legal department. Fairway Independent Mortgage, who provides us with funding and helps with this. My NMLS number is 311548, and theirs is 2289. So the lawyers can relax now.
Yeah, lawyers can take a break.
Okay.
Gotta do that for the lawyers.
And that is number one. Number two, Nathaniel Smith, who is the head of Ascent Podcasting, is an incredible engineer. And he is on board, and he's the one that gets us onto StreamYard. And then my beautiful wife, Diane, I got it this time.
You did?
I know. My beautiful wife, Diane.
How many years have we done this show, and you finally did it right?
Well, it's because I'll thank you for your leadership. I thank you for your leadership. And one of the things that we want to talk about and highlight great leaders and great veterans is leadership. And you brought two really great Marine Corps officers here who are authors, coaches, leadership trainers. And I'd like to introduce John Buford and Sean Georges. Welcome aboard, guys.
Thanks for having us.
That is Dr. John Buford to you.
Oh, Dr.
Well, we've been the silliness started before the show started, and we've got a couple of Marines hanging out, telling sea stories, which we've been doing. But to get serious, to continue Charlie Mike, which is the show's motto, continue the mission, two men that have dedicated their lives to continuing their mission, and a fascinating story and a fascinating book. And I guess let's start with, you guys have been friends since you were 10 years old?
Yeah, almost continuously. So, we grew up in a small Midwestern farm town, East Central Illinois, and used to run around the ball diamond and the playground together, and high school sports together. And then both ended up going to the Marine Corps, and everything circles around, and we always stayed in contact, but came back together to collaborate on this business and book and this passion that we have. So it's been a long ride.
Just a second, but you did not get into the Marine Corps the same way. You went about it very differently. And so let's talk about that. And then we'll let Sean talk a little bit and talk about what it was like to be a proud member of the Naval Academy.
Sure. Both my grandfathers were World War II veterans, and when my maternal grandfather was an Army colonel in 3rd Army, and he was like a father to me. He was my father, essentially. And when we buried him at Arlington National Cemetery, I was 15 years old, so it was a big deal. I looked up to the rifle detail, and there was a Marine Lance Corporal there in his dress blues, and I just looked at him, and I said, I want to be that guy. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps as a only child of a single mother at 17 years old. God bless her soul. She had to sign the papers from the recruiter to let him take me away, and enlisted in the Marine Corps in the reserves. Was there in the reserves for a bit, only made it to E3, and saw a recruiter was on campus, needed a new bumper sticker for my truck. Went in to get a bumper sticker, and you know how they are. Ended up going to OCS. So went to OCS after college, and served 20 active years in the Marine Corps.
John, what is your PhD in?
It's an education, specialized in training and performance improvement. That was never in the plan. Matter of fact, most of Sean and I's high school classmates would roll their eyes if somebody told them in the late 70s that John Buford would get a PhD. But it was something I needed to have for a job that I wanted. I wanted to teach at the college level. And they said, well, we'd love to have you. It'd be a good fit, but you got to have a PhD. And I got angry and went home and sulked. And then I thought, well, man, I got these VA benefits. Why not? You know, I've never failed at anything. So I went and got a PhD and came back and taught undergraduate college for 11 years. That was my second retirement.
Wow.
Nice. Now, Sean, you went about as opposite a way into the service as you could have.
Yeah.
Talk about that. Talk about that experience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, John and I growing up in this small town, it was a lot of time was spent sort of living the adventures that would become our lives out in our heads, right? I was introduced to this concept of and largely motivated by the fact that there wasn't enough money to actually pay for college. So my mom introduced me to this thing called the Naval Academy in West Point, and because it costed zero to attend. So in any event, I pursued, got the congressional nomination, went to Annapolis after high school graduation. And of course, John had already peeled off and he had enlisted in the Marines. And it seemed that I was always kind of chasing John's example, and he was sort of leading the way in at many points in our life. But yeah, and then realized, of course, the added benefit that although it's not often discussed, that the Marine Corps is a part of the Department of the Navy. So 15% of the graduating class could compete for a commission in the Marine Corps, and I went after that. 1983, took a commission in the Marines, and the rest followed. I ended up going to law school, became a JAG, and got to serve in various locations as a JAG in the Marines, got an advanced law degree in operational law of war, and helped to advise commanders along those lines. Left the Marines as a major, and that's when that powerful transition John and I both had to make, as every service member has to do, that just really powerful transition you have to make from that world and that community to the civilian world. And it's funny, that experience ended up being something that really was kind of at the heart of what led to this book, John and I discussing our transitions.
You know, Sean, Chuck has made a point many times about the opportunities afforded to our military. And you talked about the JAG Corps. Chuck, you've talked about that a number of times, and how you were a recruiter and you went to the law school and you said, hey, you want to practice law? I mean, basically, this is a great opportunity.
So after flight school, it's not uncommon for pilots to get 3 weeks worth of TADOSO duty, which is temporary additional duty in the officer selection office. So for those that don't know Marine acronyms, but yeah, I got there and it was kind of an odd time of year, and kind of was, what do we need? And we're, for most part, we stand around and look good with a brand new pair of gold wings on, and that's all they expected from us. And so they said, well, we really need lawyers. Wow. And asked the OSO was a major. I forget his name now, but absolutely great guy, which is not surprising at all, because he was a Marine. I mean, come on. But he kind of explained what they were looking for and what the JAG, and I'd gotten to know a couple of my JAGs through my TBS class. And so I went over to campus and I hung out at the law library, and I'd strike up a conversation because I know that's shocking that I would start talking to some stranger, but I'd always ask these lawyers what they wanted to do. And almost always they'd say, yeah, I want to be a trial lawyer, because I guess that's the pinnacle of being a lawyer for the most part. And unless you're Tom Cruise and you want to go be a tax lawyer. So I'm making jokes about John Grisham books that all the lawyers understand. But I'd ask them what the path was, and they would say, hey, it's going to take 3 to 5 years of me clerking before I can do any real trial work.
Oh,
and I said, well, what if I offered you an opportunity to do trial work like pretty much the day you showed up at the office? And
day one,
you're
going to be in the courtroom.
Yeah,
no question.
So we've kind of gotten off on a little of a jag tangent, but let's get back. How did you guys, obviously you've been friends for a long time, but let's get into your book and leadership and why that's so important. And then for me, and it was one of the dumb questions I asked at TBS, which is one of the reasons they put Marine officers in there. And so the last dumb questions there and not out in the fleet is, I made a comment because I had a business degree and I thought I was real smart. That was a joke. But kind of the difference between leadership and management. But talk about how you guys brought this together and talk about the importance of leadership. And then we'll talk about how the book came about.
Sean, I'll start with how it came together, and maybe you could build off of that. So, I was always a little bit of a leadership geek, probably unknown for the first 20 years of my life, but, Boy Scouts, high school sports, etc. Obviously the Marine Corps. I mean, I went to boot camp one summer, OCS the next summer, and phase 2 OCS the following summer, and then TBS, so officer training. And when I was in the Marine Corps, I spent, lion's share of my time on ships overseas deployed. But when I was in the States, just happenstance, I ended up teaching at the officer academies, OCS, Officer Candidate School, the basic school, and what was called Amphibious Warfare School. Mm-hmm. So I was on the faculty. So I had some academic grounding as well as the real world experience. So it was always pretty widely read about leadership. And so I always had this real focus interest in it. And then after I retired from the Marines, I went and worked for the North Carolina Outward Bound School as an outdoor leader, teaching people how to lead, and then ended up in a leadership program at college. And so that, professionally, I was always engaged with leadership. Concurrent with that, Sean can hit his story, but I don't know, Sean, 20, 25 years ago, I mean, we always were exchanging emails and talking, and this thing just kind of built momentum over time. Mm-hmm. We would question each other, challenge each other. And it came to a point where we had so many emails and so much conversation. We said, hey, we got to start putting this stuff down on paper, really defining and refining what we believe to be true about leadership.
This is one of the most important aspects of what the military community has contributed to our culture and to our country. Most people don't realize that the men and women who came back from World War II had been taught line item leadership and basically understood leadership. And that's what was a huge contributing factor to the 1950s and the great economic boom that we had, was leadership. And you learn that first and foremost in the Marine Corps. You learn that in the military. So when we come back from this break, we're going to talk about your book, On Mission. And I think Nathaniel is going to be able to put that up. We're going to talk about how leadership can make a big difference, and then what you guys do besides your book to coach people and teach people. This is the Veterans Impact Show. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show, and thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now let's continue this great conversation. Well, Chuck, we've got a great conversation going with John Buford and Sean. This is tremendous when we're talking about leadership. And one of the things that I saw in their website is talking about their mission to equip and support leaders committed to their own leadership development. Leadership, if you don't have it, you're like a ship without a rudder. You just flounder.
That's an excellent. So the one squid in the room is using his naval experience, but it's an excellent example of where leadership fits in. And quite frankly, and Sean, I'm going to throw this over to you. We seem to have a lack of, and I'm trying to not make a political statement, but overall, we don't understand leadership. So talk a little bit about kind of how your half of how you got together the book and where the mission is of y'all's firm.
Absolutely. You know, John kind of laid out our discussion over those 20 some years. And one of the things, so I had made an earlier transition into the private practice of law and then into a publicly traded company as its general counsel and head of HR. And one of the things that became, so two things I think happen in the transition. And this is probably a universal thing. Number one, you test, and it's the leader or the leadership concepts and who I was as a leader in uniform. How does that translate? In other words, who am I in the civilian world when it comes to leadership? Do the same concepts apply, or do I have to completely, so the mission has changed, does that mean I have to lead differently? And so there was a real test of that, I think, personal test for John and I. But one thing we became very aware of is the complete lack of preparation for leadership in the civilian world. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most necessary skill sets, but there is virtually, in fact, you're just lucky. It's just sort of a shot in the dark if your organization or you've been given the benefit of having a sort of structured approach to leadership. So in fact, the very purpose of our book and really what drove us was to give people a way to approach their life in an intentional way as a learning journey so that they were not dependent upon any other entity. You could literally, with some core concepts and the right perspective as a servant leader with a mission focus, you could literally shape your learning journey and use your life in order to accomplish that. So, sorry, I'll take a breath now, but
no, you're doing great.
Right.
And give us, and we've thrown it up for our viewers to see, and a quick bit of explanation. We take these breaks because we also go out on TV and on radio. And while our Facebook and LinkedIn and all of our StreamYard viewers, they don't actually see the break.
Yeah.
Those guys put their own breaks in and put their own commercials in, and it'd be really nice if some of them would pay us, but that's a whole nother story, and we'll get into that later. But talk a little bit about, what I was going to ask you to give us the website. We've got it up, and it's in the chat box for anybody who wants to look it up, but give us the website and talk about On Mission.
But the website is onmissionleaders.com. And we formed kind of concurrently, I think, with starting writing the book. We formed a little LLC just as a place to as a landing spot for people. Made a website, and we both coach, we both do programs, we both do public speaking, and a lot of that is independent of On Mission. We've been doing that for years. once the book came about, that became kind of a call for others. We've really found it a useful tool, not only to refine our message, but also to communicate and express to others what we do and what we believe. And
All right,
so,
let me interrupt you because we're going to go to a break. We want you to know that you can go to onmissionleadership.com.
Leaders, not leadership.
Leaders.com. The book is also on Amazon, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll tell you what, let's take a break. We'll be right back. The Veterans Impact Show, we're here for you. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Chuck, we're talking about leadership. And one of the points that Sean made and you made is there seems to be a real lack of leadership in many areas of our nation right now. Leaders, to me, in many cases, get to where they are, maybe by entrepreneurship, maybe by activism, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're good communicators. They can get the vision out there and they can lead people and build a team. I really see more destructive things, especially in some areas of business.
Well, and again, we can look at that, and history is full of examples of people who were, I hate to say this, but were great leaders. That's vision was really, really negative, but it doesn't mean we can't learn from what they did. And that's kind of where my next question goes. One of the things that you talked about the book and why the book is important, as opposed to thinking about leading some large organization or some great movement, and all of that's fine. But you talked about an individual taking ownership of their own leadership. And would you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that John and I have sort of learned through our engagement, both in the military and civilian world. And the core, let's see how best to put it. The core concepts regarding leadership are simple. They're not easy, but simple. And the things we learned first week of the basic school when they said they were throwing around that phrase, do you remember? Leaders eat last. Leaders eat last.
Yep.
And, starting to wrestle and grapple with that. Well, one of the things the Marine Corps has embraced, and what I've learned is really at the heart of every authentic leader, is that leaders serve. Lead is a verb. So in the civilian world, there are lots of titles. I was a part of a publicly traded company. There were, VPs, senior vice presidents, executive senior vice president. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now, the question as to whether any of them at any point in time was actually leading, meaning to influence another person with respect to their actions and their commitment in support of a mission, kind of the definition of leadership. Whether they were actually leading at any moment is a whole separate question, but they had a title. So one of the things that we do in the book is to really separate, and we have management responsibilities, we have leadership responsibilities. We manage things. We manage processes, we manage systems, right? We manage resources. Then we have these human beings. That's where leadership can come in. And that's what, we're not saying one's better than the other. You have to do both.
Right.
So that's where we wanted to clarify that and then focus on a mission, our definition, and make it practical. Mission-focused servant leader is kind of the heart and soul of what we've learned to be authentic leadership. So, John, I don't know if I...
Yeah, the only thing I would add is we really emphasize and believe and emphasize that defining yourself as a leader is a very, very important, critical first step. A lot of us get, sucked into organizations And this leadership piece are duties that are tacked on to our job. Oh yeah, I got to go lead. I got to do this. This may be a leadership situation, and we really believe that piece of really thinking yourself as a leader, and that's not being self-serving, but actually it's a call to action. Is to think of yourself, okay, I'm a leader, and then it translates not just to the HR issues at your organization, but it translates to your family, parenthood, your spouse, your community, your church committee, and your professional life. And once you do that, once you take on the role of a leader with leadership responsibilities, that gives you a great opportunity, opens up a whole new horizon to explore and test and self-reflect and do all the things that are necessary to grow in any avenue or skill, right? Whether it's a technical skill or other things. So that first piece is critically important. And we ask people in our programs to maintain a journal. There's a range of how well people like to do that, but we think it's critical. And one of the first things we ask people to do is write down, I am a leader. I strive, I aspire to lead. And then that commitment is like anything in life, that commitment is vitally important.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny that you say journal, as I have been thinking, and I've kind of programmed my son to keep a journal. Now he unfortunately has too many of them, because every time I get one of these journals, I give it to him and he starts something else in it.
Wow.
We'll have to put them all together later in his life. But I really regret now, and I mentioned this off the air, we were talking about landing on ships, which is something that I did on Westpac deployments, which all of us have done. But I didn't keep track of something even as simple as which ships that I land on and how many times. And now a lot of us can't remember the ships that we were on, because you'd go out with, at the time, 4 of them at a time. I think they're down to 3 of them now because the ships are configured a little different. But the point that I'm making is I've also thought, and I kind of regret not keeping that journal of what was going on in my life, to be able to look back on it and to see things. But you're talking about specifically doing it, targeting leadership growth and how valuable that is. And I want to come back to 4 words that you all said: mission-focused servant leadership.
Yeah.
And that is so important. And what's odd, I mean, let's be candid. We're in the 21st century. It's a very touchy-feely time in the world. We care about feelings almost more than we care about results. And I think that's a little bit of a problem. And I think part of that is a lack of mission-focused but servant leadership, people putting themselves second.
Well, you have to have a balance.
Yep.
Now, we all think, because you were involved with the golf tournament that basically is named for one of the greatest Marines that people think of, but he's thought about in the movie as the guy who's screaming in some poor boot's face. Okay,
so for those who don't know, we're talking about Arlie Ermy, whose birthday was yesterday. So happy birthday, Arlie. And the movie is Full Metal Jacket.
All right. And a lot of people think leadership, I mean, Peter Drucker, I think, wrote a great book called The Peter Principle. And a lot of people get elevated in corporations or businesses or voluntary or military, whatever, into positions that they're not capable of doing. So they go to the decibels of their voice as their leadership communication ability. And I think one of the biggest things is you've got to have a vision. You've got to have the character. You've got to have the skills of communication, and you've got to have the relationships. And if you don't have the servant leader mentality, what you're talking about, then you're not going to have the relationships with your people. You're going to lead them through decibels of the voice. You're not going to lead them where they really want to follow you into battle instead of shooting you in the back.
Yeah, Jim, that's a great point. You raised some points that are really at the heart of what John and I have tried to capture in the book and what we believe about leadership. One of those things is that is about authenticity, and it's about leadership as a relationship. That you develop these a relationship of a really quality nature. And in other words, it's not about, well, let me see what makes this guy tick so I can manipulate them, or have them jumping and hopping with various incentives or punishment. I mean, that's manipulation. That's nonsense.
Right.
Not. And one of the things that we kept in front of us as a challenge as we wrote this book is about authenticity in our own values, the way we communicate. I mean, John and I are different people, as you can tell. I'm probably a little bit more extroverted, and John maybe more introverted. And what I love about that is that it doesn't matter where you stand on various scales. You can lead from that place. You can lead from that place if you have, right? If you have that perspective of you serving your teammate or teammates in the direction of a shared mission. And we came up, and I'll stop with this one, let John speak. We came up with a single, we think is a powerful question. So from that perspective, you ask yourself this: what is my best and highest role right now in this situation to serve my teammate in the direction of our mission? Shorten it. What's my best and highest role? Ask yourself that question. You may need to ask them, hey, how can I serve you? What do you need from me right now? Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, but you're asking yourself that question as a servant. You're going to do it. You're going to go through the feedback loop if it doesn't yield the results you need, and you're going to come back at it. But that servant leader's question from that servant's perspective was important.
I think that's great. To me, I have been in companies with great entrepreneurs, but were terrible communicators and leaders. And I think back, for instance, I knew Herb Kelleher, who took over Southwest Airlines. I knew him, and I was very fortunate to be around him. And this guy was amazing. He would make you feel like he'd been waiting all day long to say hi to you. And if you ever wanted a great experience, then have the great fortune to get on a flight with Herb Kelleher. And you knew that there was a pilot in the cockpit who was driving the bus, but Herb Kelleher was in the back really driving the whole bus. Wow. And I think that that's one of the things we want to look at is servant leadership. It's biblical. It's biblical, but that transcends all the way across the board. And how many times have we seen all of this just thrown by the wayside? Again, I think Peter Drucker's book really points it out in a very dramatic way of what not to do.
And there's a lot of truth to that. The one thing that I wanted to mention, everything we've been talking about and some of the comments that Jim has made, he is literally reading directly out of the book On Mission. And I absolutely love the phrase authentic leadership. The website is onmissionleaders.com. There is a wealth of information on the website. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, I get what you're saying, how can I become a better leader? Because we're talking about things that transcend industries. It transcends organizations. It applies literally everywhere. And the whole, and part of it, and there's an expression, and we don't want to go too religious today. We do that on occasion, but there's a lot of truth in it. But the expression, I am second, great leaders always put themselves second. And I want to share a real quick TBS story. And I try not to do this too often, but it fits so well to this, is I was serving in while you're at TBS, you serve in different company billets. and you basically get an opportunity to test out the role, so to speak, but you're graded on this. And so I was actually serving as the XO, and I was interacting a lot with the real XO of the company, and I just came away totally unimpressed with this gentleman. And I went to my platoon commander off, and then they always give you a write-up afterwards. And the guy had one line in there on the job, and I'd worked my tail off for this. And it was such a letdown. And I went to my platoon commander, and I said, and he was a first lieutenant, so we were a little closer in that there's a huge chasm between lieutenants and captains in the Marine Corps, just like there is between colonels and generals. This is a big gap. And so he was more one of us. But anyway, I said to him, I kind of laid this stuff out for him. And he said, Chuck, you have to understand, they're all examples of leadership. They're not all examples of good leadership.
Boy.
And you can learn from both.
I had some of that in the Navy. And
Yep.
let me tell you, we had a lot of World War II veterans who had served and had serious problems with PTS and alcohol. And the Navy encouraged going to the bars and drinking.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. And we laughed about it. And, you know, all of that has changed. Today's Navy, today's Marine Corps is really, I think, in tune with the leadership lessons that you guys are talking about. We're going to wrap up in just a minute as I bring this ship back into the dock, but we want to continue the conversation about leadership. So we'll be right back after these words from all of our partners. This Veteran Impact Show is for you. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
Not making noise.
Hey, Chuck, I got to tell you, this is a great, great conversation. I want everybody to share this, get it out there. And one of the other things that I think is so great, this is an example of the kind of leadership that the military trains young men and women. And, you know, I was talking with my good friend, Woody Beale, Admiral Beale, and we were
You
talking.
name dropper, you.
And I was we were talking because Woody and I have become close friends. He was talking about the Ukraine situation and the Russians. And he said, do you understand, Jim, who really leads the Navy? And I looked at him and I said, yes, sir, the chiefs, the senior enlisted. And he said, that's right. And he said, the United States military has developed leadership throughout the ranks to be able to be what it is today. And there's probably no other country in the world that has developed leadership in the enlisted ranks. He said, especially the Soviets.
The Soviets have a real problem with that, and it is a major problem that one of the reasons the Ukrainians are basically with inferior weapon systems. Well, they're getting better and better now, but kicking their butts. And so we are very close to the end of the show. I'd like to ask both Dr. John, and I was listening to a little Dr. John this morning, and Sean to give us some final thoughts before we introduce next week's guest, and then close with our prayer.
Sure. I think if there's anything, the one thing that really stands out to me that's really helped me over the years is this notion of balancing mission and people. This is a message that Sean and I have really consolidated on. The old question, what's more important, mission or people? It's a false dichotomy. It's both. Mission, of course, is always primary, but not when your people need support and attention. Mission and people are equally important. We all know that, your family is most important, but if your house is on fire, fighting fires is most important, right? And that's the way it is. It was in the military. And when I came to the civilian world, I had to wrestle with that. And that's where we landed on that. So I would just encourage folks to see those two things as co-equal in importance. Sometimes you spend more time on one than the other, but you're never going to accomplish the mission without people. And you can get so sucked into deft HR issues, you never get to accomplishing the very task the team was designed and formed for. So false dichotomy. It's not mission or people. It's both.
Okay. Where can we get your book, and tell us your website and tell us what the book is, because that's really important. Excuse me for interrupting.
No problem. On Mission, Your Journey to Authentic Leadership. It's available everywhere. You can get on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, probably some brick and mortar stores.
You can also download the audio through Audible.
And Kindle. Yep, it's Audible and Kindle. You can contact Sean and I through our website, onmissionleaders.com. Our email is on there, and we'd love to talk to everybody. We're not just out there scraping the branches to try to get business. We like to talk about leadership, and so I'd love to hear from you.
Great conversation. Sean, you've got 60 seconds.
Yeah. You cannot lead without love. And we're not talking about the soft, fuzzy coddling thing. We're talking about leadership has to come at some level from a genuine concern, an authentic concern for your teammates. And that's another principle. The principles are simple. They are sometimes hard to apply, but necessary. And you have to go on your learning journey in order to get this, to make this a part of your life. And we need you to lead in your life.
Gentlemen, absolutely love it. I wish we had more time.
Well, we'll bring these guys back again because
absolutely.
We had a lot of fun. I want to say thank you for being on board, guys, and thank you again for all you do. Next week, Admiral Michael Manzer. He served in 1983 to 2017. He is a veteran, a VP with Boeing. He is our guest next week. And Woody Beale's going to be here too, because the two guys flew together.
Cool.
All right. I want to say a quick prayer. Lord God, thank you for protecting our active duty military. Thank you for protecting our first responders. And thank you for protecting our veterans who lead in our community. Thank you, Lord God, for all they do. And thank you for reuniting our nation. This I pray in your holy name. Amen. Thank you for being part of our Veterans Impact Show, and thank you for two really great Marines. What a great day. The Veteran Impact Show will be back next week.